You're listening to Happy Hour Hustle from the creative geniuses here at 834. We're funny, informative, and we swear. We talk all things marketing, communication, small business, plus we offer up hot takes on our industry and whatever else we feel like talking about. So, grab your drink of choice. It's always 5 o'clock at 834. And crank it up. Hey hustlers, welcome back to Happy Hour Hustle. Today I'm sitting down with Grace Gavin, co-founder of No Honesty, 3-time founder and an expert in open and honest communication. And yes, she'll tell you those are actually two different things. Through her book, workshops, and keynotes, Grace helps leaders and organizations have the real conversations that actually move the needle. We get into why so many workplace conversations go sideways, even when everyone thinks they're being reasonable, what leaders are actually missing when they say they want honesty, and the conversations most teams are avoiding that they really can't afford to. Here's our conversation. Grace, thank you so much for joining Happy Hour Hustle today.
Thanks for having me, Maddie. I'm excited for whatever we're going to talk about.
Whatever we're going to talk about. Well, obviously communication is something that you are a big expert in. So I kind of want to start the conversation there. Tell me a little bit about No Honesty. What do people need to know about that?
Yeah, well, first off, it's No Honesty spelled K-N-O-W. So that's a little bit of a distinction that's important as far as people listening. But there's a little bit of a play on words there because really at the heart of what we do, what we saw is there was a lack of honesty, if you will, N-O honesty in the workplace. And we thought, man, that's hurting teams and that's hurting companies and it's hurting the employees of those organizations. And so myself and my co-author, my business partner, Ken Bogard, set out to help educate people on what it looks like to be honest, how to do that. And through that, what we found, is this heart of communication is 2 skills. And so I think that's probably the heart of what we're going to talk about today. But the skills that it takes to have real communication within a team is really simple. And it's 2 skills. It's open and honest. Now, we're probably going to break those down because they're very different, but a lot of times people just smush them together. But that is the heart of what we teach leaders and the gap that we saw. Because, you can have the best systems, best software, you can hire top of the top talent, but if people can't communicate, in a business made of people, that doesn't work. And so that's the heart of why we do what we do.
Awesome. And yeah, I do want to dive into the open and honest thing. But before we dive into the differences, which do you think or have you seen is harder for teams to really accomplish or capture? Or is it is it both?
Yeah. I think it depends on which team we're talking about. So I primarily work with leaders and managers of companies. And so that's what I can speak to most. And what I think they struggle with a lot more is the openness side of things.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's dive into openness first. How do you define that? And why is it not both open and honest?
Yeah. So openness, as we define it, is listening without reservation, putting your needs and wants on pause for someone else. Because a lot of people will think about openness as being an open book or being transparent, which is, great. And that's important. That's the honesty side of things. But that's about me, myself, and I. And if you're leading people, if you're leading projects, it can't just be about you. That doesn't really work. And that was really, Maddie, the huge gap that we saw with leaders when we were diving into this work. It was like, yeah, everybody wants to be honest. They hope that they're being honest. That's the goal. But then the question became, well, why aren't they? And that's where we really found the openness is kind of the missing skill that I don't feel I see a lot of people talking about. And so that's really the key. Like that's the big gap because, leaders, we get to a certain point in our organizations because we're really good at seeing what we see, fixing the problem, working through it, leading strategy, things like that. But at some point, some of us leaders forget that, a really key ingredient is listening to other people for a minute, pausing our wants, our needs, because that's what it means to be on a team. I especially see that struggle with entrepreneurs who have gone from leading the business all on their own, having all the answers, to then building a team around them. And now they've got people that they love, they trust, they need to rely on, but they also need to build the muscle of listening and trusting them. And sometimes going in a different direction than what the entrepreneur initially had in their mind.
Can you give an example of, what being open is, or where some people might misconstrue that they feel like they're being open, but in reality, they may not be?
Yeah. Prime example is any time that you are having a conversation with somebody and you start to preform your answer before they've even finished speaking, you're no longer listening. right? You're already in your head, you're thinking through, and it might look like you're listening or it might seem like you're still engaged, but you're not. Because as humans, we can't multitask. And so what I work with on leaders is just kind of starting to catch themselves in that. Like, I see you got 50% of what they said, and now you want to respond to that, but you're missing 50%. And so we got to work through that skill.
Do you feel that at times, because, as I'm hearing the concept of openness, I go back to my roots in journalism, and you're taught to kind of already start thinking about the next thing, or thinking about, and I feel like that's a lot of your training going through school too, is, well, you want to, it's active listening, it's being prepared. But is that almost a little bit of like a backsliding on that open side of things? Like, really being truly open means taking a pause after listening, right? And being able to respond accordingly.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's an important thing that you just noted is we think active listening means having a response ready to go. No, that's responding. You're not listening then at that point. You're being active, but not in the right way. And I find that that's really, for leaders, it's really hard because a lot of people look to them to have the answers. And so it feels a little bit uncomfortable to maybe not have the answer immediately, to pause, to have a thought, to digest what somebody has said. But that is where you're going to get a lot better collaboration and people are going to feel heard and respected. And then they're going to stay at your organizations for a lot longer when we talk about, the issues around talent and retaining people. I think that's a key part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So then honesty. Obviously, I feel like people think they're being honest, but what do you see kind of missing when people say they want honesty? What's the missing ingredient there? What do you see are people's biggest missteps when it comes to that?
People hold back, and some people hold back 10%, some people hold back 50%, 60%. And what that tells me, bringing it, back to the gap and the openness side of things, is that they either don't trust that there's openness on the other side, or they've never clarified it. Sometimes there is, but they don't know that for sure. And so honesty, when we look at it, it's being truly and freely yourself, speaking into what you want and how you feel. And I love, I think Kim talks about this when she talks about authentic self and your quirks and stuff like that. That's all that it is, right? Is that opportunity to be honest. But a lot of times we just don't know. We don't know how it's going to be received on the other side. And so we kind of self-protect and only give half truths. And if we're working in a team and we only give a half truth, then we're only going to get a half solution, or maybe less than half.
What do you think holds people? I know you talked about the openness side of things, but how do you move past that as an employee-employer relationship, or as a leader, to try to pull honesty kind of out of your team? Because I feel like that's one of those roles as well. And then also as an employee on that end, how do you work to, I mean, maybe the openness is there, but you still struggle to come as full authentic self, or full, how do you work past that, or what kind of things do you suggest for people?
Yeah, we have a really great practice called the agreement, and it's a very simple script to start out a conversation. We actually, when we're working with our clients, we recommend they put it as part of their interviewing, their hiring, their onboarding, all of that. So it starts out like, this is the kind of communication we're going to have. And I'm going to give it to listeners right here so that they have this tool in their pocket. But it's as simple as this. It takes like 10 seconds. And here's what it is. Maddie, will you agree with me on how we're going to communicate? I want you to be 100% honest, meaning I want you to be truly and freely yourself, speaking into what you want and how you feel. And I promise I'm going to be 100% open to it. I'm going to listen to you without reservation. I'm going to put my needs and wants on pause for you. And in return, I'll be honest with you, and I ask that you be completely open to it. And that's the whole thing, because what I find a lot of times is we don't set the expectations for our relationships when it comes to communication. Like, we've got, yes, companies have core values and here's what we live by. And, here's our uniform policy and what it looks like to show up professionally here. But do we ever talk about how we communicate? Do we ever talk about the kind of assumptions we bring into the place? I was working with a leader one time who had this exact aha, because she said, the last place I worked was really, really toxic. And so I had to self-protect a lot and self-edit and not give the full truth. And she realized, I'm bringing that into my next organization. And I don't even know if this is a toxic culture, but I've just been so wrapped up and consumed in that. And we haven't clarified that. And she's like, I don't think this is a place that's that way. But now, because I'm starting to behave that way, now I'm starting to bring that toxic pattern into this organization. And so we just got to be a little bit more aware of how we communicate, kind of the metacognition of it, of thinking about our thinking about our communication.
And I think that's such an important thing to touch on too. So many people bring past trauma from previous work situations into their new roles, and into their new jobs. when so many people, like if you're a leader leading a team and people have different trauma or different things, how do you even begin to go about kind of understanding where they're coming from on those things with while still also, leading?
Curiosity is a big one. So you set the expectations, right? That's part of the agreement. And then the other part of the agreement is now there's expectations in place. And so you can say, hey, I feel like you're not being 100% honest here. I'm just getting this sense what's going on here, and starting with that curiosity, right? Because there might be some defensiveness. There might be some walls up around there. But the way to work through that is through curiosity and helping somebody understand. And then doing that time after time after time. Like when I go and teach clients, it's a great big aha of like, oh my word, yes, this is what we've been missing. And then it's the daily practice of it. Like you have the aha, but the transformation happens in every conversation where you show up more honest and you show up more open. The idea of the 1% better every day is exactly how we get to that higher level of trust. And then you can work through that trauma with somebody and say, hey, that's really tough. I'm sorry that that happened. That's not something we want to experience, you to experience here. So if you ever feel like that, I want you to bring it to me. Come be honest with me on that. Because we value your expertise and we want to get this work moving and keep going. And so if there's barriers to that, let's talk about it.
What have you found in terms of, you know, because you talk about the 1% and the working through it and the work, and it takes like a step by step because no one's perfect. And I feel like everyone has setbacks in those moments of, God, I know I wasn't being open there, or yeah, I wasn't fully honest, but you know what? I had a bad day. And do setback, like what do you coach when it comes to setbacks like that? Or when, you know, because building trust it's building over time. What are your suggestions when it does come to like when someone slips up or they, have that bad day or do something like that? Is there space for that when it comes to continuing to grow in this open and honest space?
Yeah. Yeah. As an open and honest expert, I fail at this a lot. And it takes owning it. And like, hey, I realize I wasn't completely open to that idea. I'm sorry, team. And that's a real one, right? Like that's a team. My team will bring me ideas on improving our process. And I'm like, nope, don't want to hear it. I'm like, oh, that's probably not great for collaboration. And they can
Yeah.
call me out on that. I'm sure it's in other worlds, but I actually heard about it in the parenting world. It's called rupture and repair. And so a rupture is like something happens, like there's a conflict or a disagreement, or we leave something and it just doesn't feel right. And a lot of times people will just leave it and they'll ignore it and they're like, I'm not really going to deal with that. But when we go back and we repair and we say, hey, I'm sorry for this, or hey, I failed on this, or I didn't get this completely right, I'm working on it. Number one, that shows your team what failure looks like, how to model it, and how to get better. And then number two, the repair, that's actually where trust and relationships get stronger. It's not by doing everything perfectly, it's by going back and owning it and saying, hey, I apologize. Here's what I want to do differently. That's not how I wanted to show up. And then your team starts to trust you because guess what? They're going to mess it up too. And now you're modeling for them what it looks like to come back and repair and say, hey, I didn't get that right. And now we go so much further.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when you are honest with people, because I want to touch on this too, it's not always is feedback received in the best way because honest doesn't always mean nice. Honest, it's the kind not nice thing. It's the West Michigan nice.
Mhm.
I know we're all familiar with that concept, but how do you give and then also accept feedback that may not be what people are either expecting or that's not always the best feedback? What do you suggest people do on both sides of that conversation to kind of not soften the blow but continue that open and honest part of it without harming a relationship? Because what if the feedback isn't good, and how can you be open to that on either side?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, feedback is one of those that I get asked about a lot.
It's tough. People,
Yeah.
I mean, even if you say you like feedback, that's not really probably you being honest.
Yeah. First, I think we got to check ourselves. Why are we giving this feedback? Is it because we are upset at the way somebody handled something and it's just us? Or was it something that really affected a client relationship? So, where is that coming from? Let's be clear on the objective of giving the feedback and then walking into it, starting out with the agreement and saying, hey, being honest, like, hey, this is tough for me to say, but I'm doing it because I love you, I care about you, I respect you, I want you to get better. And this might not be easy to hear, and I understand that. And I want you to ask any questions or sit with it, whatever, and then give the feedback, check in with them, ask them, like, hey, what did you hear me say out of this? And get to an understanding, and then decide what are next steps to help this person improve. So that kind of goes back to checking yourself of why am I doing this? Is it to help this person improve? Okay, great. And if it really is to help the person improve, then please, for the love of everything, check in with them like a week later, 2 weeks later. Some people need to sit with that tough feedback and they got to wrestle with it. And they might take it more personally than it was meant, but we got to check in with them and say, hey, how are you doing on improving that? Hey, what can I help and support you and love you through this and help you get better? And frame it that way. If you're just giving feedback to be a jerk, well, that's not the way to do it.
No, I like that. And then on the other side of things, when receiving feedback, because that's a really hard place to be into, what are your suggestions to help either one, be honest without being reactive to that? And also to, I don't know, to not be like, go cry at a ball. I mean, I feel like so many people, and that's such a struggle with, the constant feedback loops of social media and, what we expect now feedback to look like versus maybe what feedback used to feel like 10, 15, 20 years ago in a workplace, and what would just like people are, especially younger generations, are kind of used to on a daily basis. How do you sit with that as someone that both one needs feedback, but maybe it doesn't always like hearing it?
Yeah, I appreciate you talking about the younger generation too, because there's a constant loop like you're talking about. I think it's okay to go cry. Like I've gotten really tough feedback and done that, and that's part of processing it through. So one of the things that we talk about on the openness side of things, of being open to feedback is taking it in and letting it go. And so sometimes, well, I'll say a lot of times actually, what happens is people take in the feedback and then they let it fester and they either let it, ruin the relationship, like, oh, I hate that person for what they said to me, or they really take it down on themselves and it knocks their confidence. But what I help leaders walk through is like, let's take it in, let's process it. And process it can look like crying. It can look like talking it through with a coach. It can look like thinking it through. But most importantly is like, all right, what am I going to take out of this to get stronger and to keep moving? And then I'm going to let it go and I'm going to keep moving forward. And at first, that might take a lot longer. But as you continue to develop that muscle of taking it in and letting it go, it's going to go a lot faster. And you start to put the feedback through the filter of, all right, what can I learn from this? What can I take from this and keep going forward? The problem is a lot of times we take it personal. And that's probably another tip on the feedback side of things is we need to be giving feedback on behavior, not who the person is. That's a very important distinction. Like, hey, I see you doing this behavior, or I see this way you're speaking to clients, and I'm not sure that you maybe see the impact that it's having because I know you're a kind person, you care about our clients, and maybe you're not seeing this. So I just want to share this with you. And that way we can change a behavior rather than trying to change somebody as a person.
Yeah. And that's, a way that someone even takes it more personally. It's like, well, you're attacking me, not something which is not something I could change, right? I can change a behavior. I cannot change who I am as a person. I mean, I guess you can, but you shouldn't be asking someone to necessarily do that. What would you say is, because essentially what we're talking about is, having the hard conversation, right? That's a lot of time what feedback is. Oftentimes you only think of it when it's the bad stuff. I always say it's good to do both. But what would you say is the cost of not doing that, of not having those hard conversations? Or what have you observed? Like, have you met with leaders where you're like, well, you're just not even really talking to them. Like, how do you expect them to know?
Yeah. Yeah, what happens? Ooh, lots of bad stuff. What happens is when we avoid the tough conversations, there's an underlying tension that lives within the organization. And we may not be able to name exactly where it's coming from or what it is, but everybody can sense that. So if I'm walking into a room really tense, as human beings, we have something called mirror neurons. And so we end up kind of receiving what we feel from somebody else and mirroring it back. So if I walk in with tension and everybody feels that, now there's a little mirror of that going on. And if that happens in a company over time, you see people start to leave. And that's where you see comments around like, yeah, the culture just wasn't great. And it might not be the culture, it's that tension of those unsaid conversations that are happening. So that's one thing, and people just kind of silently leave. The other side of things that can happen when we don't have those conversations is they build and build and build and build and build until there's a blow up that happens. Now, we try to avoid the blow up, and by avoiding it, it gets so much worse. But what I will say to leaders, please hear me on this, is that the blow up needs to happen. I'd rather it happen when it's like a tiny little thing than a year later and it's this huge, massive reckoning and it's a big problem. But either way, it's got to happen. So you get to decide which one do you want to deal with.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I feel like through the jobs we've had, we've all seen a blow up at one point.
Mm-hmm.
So, no, absolutely. What do you think are the other things apart from not having those conversations are kind of like the, for lack of better word, like the silent like culture killers that come from communication, or like what are the communication mistakes you see most often repeated that people may not feel are having as much damage as they actually are, but they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One that's a big one. It's kind of hard to see at first, but if there's not honesty and openness in an organization, there's going to be a lack of innovation because people don't feel like they can bring their different ideas, sometimes wacky, crazy ideas. It only is wacky and crazy until it works. And then it's innovative. And so that's a quiet one that we don't really see as human beings right away. But that can look like kind of just status quo, minor growth year after year. Nothing groundbreaking is happening. And I especially think in this day and age, the companies that are innovative, that are willing to try some stuff, do things differently than the way that they've always done it, are going to be the ones that win. And then the other part of it too is people just don't stay as long at an organization where they're not able to be fully honest and they're not heard and respected. And then another key part of it is performance. And so I believe it was Deloitte that studied this, but when people can show up at work and be honest, you can use the word authenticity, all those things, they see a 50% decrease in turnover risk and a 56% increase in job performance.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really key thing too, is that turnover piece, because so many places, I think so many businesses right now are dealing with it. And that cost of turnover is high. I mean, a lot of businesses just say, well, I can't absorb any more of it, right? Especially smaller businesses. It's different with a multi-million-dollar company trying to absorb the loss of one person. What would be your message then to, I guess, anyone listening on the employer side, on the leader side of things? And leaders can be both owners, they could be managers, all that. Just when it comes to this concept of open and honest communication. I mean, it feels like it's not something you can afford to have just one of, right? But what's your message on it?
My message would be to just start and be committed to it. And when you mess it up, own it. And you'll see a difference in the conversations within a month. But when you look back in a year, you'll see a huge transformation.
Awesome. Well, Grace, thank you so much for coming on. I really had a nice time talking to you. And I mean, I think all of this is so relevant right now. People are the hardest part of leading. They're also the whole part of leading.
Yep.
So just very, very relevant and important information right now. Is there anything else that you just wanted to add that we haven't touched on?
Yeah. This is the work of leadership. That's what it is. It's as simple as these two skills, but it's also as hard as these two skills. And that's what it means to be a leader and to show up day after day. And I promise you, if you invest in just building these skills, you will be the kind of leader that makes a difference.
Awesome. Grace, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Maddie.